The roar of engines filled the morning air over Henderson Field as smoke billowed from the crippled Corsair fighter, struggling to maintain altitude. It was November 23, 1942, and Staff Sergeant Kazimir Volkov stood frozen on the control tower platform, watching death approach at 200 miles per hour. The pilot's radio crackled with static and desperation, his voice barely audible through the interference caused by the electrical fire consuming his instrument panel. The young aviator was flying blind, his canopy fogged with smoke, his compass spinning wildly, and his altimeter reading 0 across a shattered glass face. Standard protocol demanded that Volkov guide the aircraft to the emergency crash site, 3 miles inland, away from the precious fuel dumps and ammunition stores that kept the Solomon Islands campaign alive. But as Kazimir watched the Corsair wobble uncertainly against the pale blue sky, he realized that following orders would mean watching a fellow American die. The pilot had maybe 90 seconds of fuel remaining, not enough to reach the designated crash zone, and certainly not enough to attempt the impossible precision landing that Henderson Field's short, bomb-cratered runway demanded. No one in the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing knew that one man's defiance that morning would rewrite flight safety protocols forever. Kazimir Volkov had never planned to become a hero. Born in the steel town of Gary, Indiana, to Ukrainian immigrants who worked the blast furnaces of U.S. Steel, he grew up understanding that survival meant innovation and that following rules blindly could get you killed. His father, Dmitry, had lost 3 fingers to a crane accident caused by miscommunication between the floor supervisor and the crane operator. An incident that taught young Kazimir that clear signals could mean the difference between life and death. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Kazimir enlisted from a practical understanding that the war would consume every able-bodied man eventually. Aviation mechanics school at Pensacola revealed his natural genius for understanding complex systems under pressure, and his instructors noted his unusual ability to diagnose engine problems by sound alone. His Ukrainian heritage made some fellow servicemen suspicious, but Kazimir's methodical precision and unshakable calm under fire gradually earned their respect. By the time he shipped out to the Solomon Islands, he had developed a reputation as the mechanic who could fix anything and the man who never panicked, even when Japanese bombers turned their airfield into a crater-filled moonscape. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between a fellow serviceman and death. The Solomon Islands campaign of 1942 represented a crucial turning point in the Pacific theater, where American forces struggled to establish their first major offensive foothold against the Japanese Empire. Henderson Field on Guadalcanal had become the focal point of a savage contest for air superiority, with both sides pouring men and machines into a meat grinder that consumed aircraft faster than factories could produce them. The field's single runway stretched just 3,600 feet across uneven ground, carved from a coconut plantation, making every landing a calculated risk even under ideal conditions. Japanese air raids arrived with clockwork precision, forcing ground crews to work frantically between bombing runs to keep their fighters operational. Supply lines stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, making every spare part precious and every skilled mechanic irreplaceable. The pressure created an environment where innovation flourished out of necessity, where men like Kazimir developed unconventional solutions to problems that military manuals had never anticipated. Combat flying demanded perfect communication between pilots and ground control. But the primitive radio equipment of 1942 frequently failed under stress, leaving aviators to navigate by instinct and prayer. The morning of November 23rd began with Lieutenant Commander Thaddeus Kowalski drawing the reconnaissance mission over Iron Bottom Sound. His Corsair, a battle-scarred veteran of 37 combat missions, bore scars from previous encounters with Zero fighters, but her engine ran smooth. The first sign of trouble came at 0947 hours, when Kowalski's voice crackled through the radio with controlled urgency. "Henderson Tower, this is Blackbird Leader. I've got smoke in the cockpit, and my electrical system is acting up." Casimir immediately moved to the primary radio console, beginning standard emergency procedures. "Blackbird Leader, Henderson Tower, what is your position and fuel status?" The response came through bursts of static. "Henderson Tower, I'm approximately 15 miles southeast of your position, fuel showing quarter tank, but I can't trust my gauges anymore." The words carried ominous undertones. Electrical failure meant loss of critical navigation and communication equipment, leaving the pilot flying blind in an aircraft that could become a fireball. "Henderson Tower, I'm losing more electrical power and my compass is spinning like a pinwheel." Kowalski's voice carried barely suppressed urgency. "I can see smoke coming from behind my instrument panel, and I'm starting to lose visibility through the canopy." Major Rutherford stepped beside Casimir, his face grim. "Sergeant Volkov, guide him to the crash site inland. We can't risk him hitting the fuel dumps if he doesn't make it. Major, with respect, I don't think he has the fuel to make it to the crash site." Casimir's words challenged military protocol with calm certainty. His electrical fire is probably affecting his fuel pumps, which means his consumption rate has increased, and if he's flying blind, he's not maintaining optimal efficiency. Major Rutherford's face darkened. "Sergeant, you have your orders. Guide that aircraft to the designated crash site." But Casimir had already made his decision based on calculations that transcended military rank. Through binoculars, he could see a tiny speck growing larger as Kowalski's crippled Corsair approached Henderson Field. Casimir grabbed the microphone, his voice cutting across protests. "Blackbird Leader, this is Henderson Tower. I can see you approaching from the southeast. Your aircraft appears to be trailing light smoke, and I'm going to guide you straight in for an emergency landing on runway 27. The words hung like an act of mutiny, but Kowalski's response crackled with unmistakable relief. "Henderson Tower, thank God. I can barely see anything in here, and my fuel gauge just went to 0. Major Rutherford stepped back, recognizing that court-martial would be meaningless if Kowalski died destroying their fuel supplies. "Sergeant Volkov, you've got control of this approach." "Blackbird Leader, I have you in sight approximately 2 miles southeast. Your approach looks good, but you're coming in about 50 feet high. Can you see the runway?" Gut. Kowalski's response came through increasing static. "Negative. Henderson Tower, I can make out some sort of clearing ahead, but I can't distinguish the runway from surrounding terrain." Casimir realized traditional radio guidance would fail within minutes, leaving Kowalski to attempt a blind landing with no communication. The solution came with desperate clarity. If radio communication was failing, visual communication might succeed. "Major Rutherford, I need to get out on the runway with signal flares. If his radio fails completely, I can guide him in with visual signals." Major Rutherford stared at him, calculating risks. "Sergeant, you'll be standing directly in the path of a burning aircraft piloted by a man who can't see where he's going." But Casimir had calculated the odds. "Sir, if I position myself correctly and use signal flares to mark the runway centerline, I can guide him in even if his radio fails completely." Major Rutherford hesitated, then nodded. "Do it, Sergeant, but be extremely careful." Casimir grabbed signal flares and sprinted toward the runway, positioning himself 800 feet from the threshold where his signals would provide maximum guidance. The Corsair appeared over jungle canopy, trailing smoke from multiple locations, flying with unstable wobble, indicating pilot disorientation and mechanical failure. Casimir ignited signal flares with brilliant red flames that cut through morning air like beacons of hope. "Blackbird Leader, if you can see my position, I'm marking the runway centerline with signal flares. Follow the red smoke down to touchdown." The aircraft's approach angle was too steep and airspeed too low, threatening disaster unless corrected immediately. With radio communication failing, Casimir began waving flares in wide arcs above his head, creating unmistakable visual signals. The Corsair responded, its nose lifting as Kowalski adjusted, based purely on visual cues. But as the aircraft descended through 500 feet, Casimir realized visual guidance alone wouldn't suffice. The aircraft was drifting left of centerline, threatening to crash into supply dumps. The solution came with sudden inspiration. Casimir dropped the flares and began using his entire body as a guidance system, pointing with exaggerated arm movements toward the runway centerline. The Corsair's engine suddenly changed pitch, developing rough rhythm indicating imminent failure. Casimir realized Kowalski had perhaps 30 seconds of power remaining. "Come on, hold together," he whispered, continuing exaggerated signals as the aircraft crossed the threshold 50 feet high, still slightly left, but close enough for possible correction. "Come on, Thaddeus, you can do this." Casimir used the pilot's first name as human connection transcended military protocol. The Corsair was now less than half a mile from touchdown, flying through shimmering heat waves. Casimir could see the pilot's helmeted head moving as Kowalski tried to penetrate smoke-fogged canopy and find visual references. Signal flares burned with brilliant intensity, creating vertical columns marking the center line with unmistakable clarity. But visual guidance alone wasn't sufficient. The aircraft was drifting left of centerline, threatening catastrophe. Without radio communication for precise corrections, Casimir faced the impossible task of guiding a blind pilot through final approach using only gestures. The Corsair's engine coughed once, twice, then died completely as the electrical fire reached critical components. Sudden silence was deafening, broken only by wind whistling over metal surfaces as the aircraft settled into a glide determining life or death. Casimir continued running down runway centerline, arm signals becoming frantic as he communicated immediate touchdown urgency to a pilot who could barely see. The aircraft responded, nose dropping abruptly as Kowalski committed to a landing attempt, defying conventional procedures. Main landing gear touched runway surface with an impact sending vibrations through ground, but the aircraft carried too much speed and began bouncing back into air in dangerous oscillations. Without radio communication, Casimir continued signals, indicating Kowalski should relax control pressure and allow natural stability to overcome bouncing. The Corsair touched down again, staying in contact as Kowalski followed guidance, but with no engine power and limited braking, the aircraft was still traveling at high speed toward Jungle Edge. Smoke poured from engine compartment as internal fires spread, and flames began appearing around cowling. The aircraft suddenly swerved right, gear dropping into soft ground, providing additional braking, but threatening structural damage. Wingtip struck a coconut palm with metallic crash, but impact dissipated remaining energy and brought the Corsair to a stop just short of Jungle. Casimir reached the aircraft as flames intensified, realizing Kowalski had perhaps 60 seconds to escape before cockpit became dangerous. "Thaddeus, get out of there now," Casimir shouted while climbing onto wing, reaching for external canopy release. Metal was already hot from spreading fire, and smoke poured from every opening. "I can't get the canopy open," Kowalski called out, voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. Casimir found external release mechanism and pulled with all strength, feeling mechanical resistance from damage. System finally yielded with metallic snap, and canopy slid back just as flames reached cockpit area. "Come on, we need to get clear." Casimir helped Kowalski from cockpit, and together they moved away just as flames reached main fuel tank and transformed scene into spectacular but controlled fire. Both men stood at safe distance, watching the aircraft that had carried Kowalski through 37 previous missions burn with aviation fuel intensity, creating a pillar of black smoke visible for miles across Solomon Islands. The aftermath brought mixture of relief, investigation, and quiet recognition, defying normal military bureaucracy. Major Rutherford arrived within minutes, followed by medical personnel and officers who appeared whenever procedures were violated with successful results. Kowalski was transported to Field Hospital for smoke inhalation treatment, but injuries were remarkably light considering emergency severity. Investigation revealed electrical failure had reduced fuel endurance to half-predicted levels, confirming that following orders to reach inland crash site would have resulted in fatal jungle crash with no rescue possibility. Wreckage examination showed engine suffered catastrophic damage from electrical fire, confirming Casimir's assessment that radio failure was inevitable and visual guidance had been the only method capable of bringing aircraft safely to airfield. Most significant discovery came from interviews with other pilots who witnessed the approach. Kowalski's landing appeared so precise it seemed guided by experienced ground controller using sophisticated equipment rather than aircraft mechanic using improvised hand signals. Mathematical precision challenged conventional understanding of visual communication possibilities, suggesting humans could achieve coordination levels exceeding existing technology capabilities when lives depended on successful communication. Within a week, word spread throughout 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, and personnel began requesting instruction in Casimir's visual guidance techniques. Success led to development of standardized hand signal procedures for emergency aircraft recovery, techniques eventually becoming part of standard flight operations training throughout military aviation system. Years after war ended, Kowalski returned to Nebraska crop dusting, but incorporated visual guidance techniques into civilian operations, developing hand signals, allowing ground personnel to guide agricultural aircraft during low-visibility operations. He became flight instructor, passing along lessons about visual communication to new aviators who benefited from innovations developed under wartime pressure. Casimir completed military service and returned to Gary, Indiana, establishing aircraft maintenance business, serving growing civilian aviation industry. His reputation for innovative problem-solving made business successful, but he never spoke publicly about the incident that made him hero at Henderson Field. Visual guidance techniques pioneered that desperate morning eventually influenced modern airport lighting systems, approach indicators, and standardized hand signals used by ground personnel at airports worldwide. Commercial passengers landing safely at major airports rarely understand their aircraft are guided by systems evolving from innovations developed by Ukrainian immigrant son who violated orders to save fellow serviceman's life. Mathematical principles underlying visual approach guidance have been refined through decades of technological advancement, but fundamental concept remains unchanged. Clear communication between ground and air personnel is essential for safe aircraft operations, and humans possess natural abilities that can supplement or replace electronic systems when circumstances demand flexibility and innovation. Today, when modern pilots face electrical failures or communication breakdowns threatening their ability to land safely, they benefit from procedures developed through courage of men who refuse to accept that following orders was more important than saving lives. The story represents more than single-incident heroism. It demonstrates how individual acts of intelligent disobedience can produce innovations benefiting countless others across generations. Mathematical precision achieved through visual communication that morning proved humans possess abilities no electronic system can duplicate, and that effective technology must enhance rather than replace natural communication skills, allowing people to coordinate complex activities under pressure. Modern airports employ thousands whose jobs exist because of techniques developed by aircraft mechanics who understood saving lives was more important than following procedures. Commercial aviation safety statistics show accidents due to communication failures have decreased dramatically since standardized visual guidance development, saving thousands of lives and preventing tragedies inevitable under previous methods. The question emerging from this story transcends specific wartime circumstances and touches fundamental issues of leadership, innovation, and moral courage relevant in every field of human endeavor. When established procedures conflict with practical necessity and human welfare, when following orders would result in preventable tragedy, what separates heroes from ordinary people is willingness to accept personal risk to do what is right rather than what is required. Kazimir Volkov's decision to disobey orders and guide Thaddeus Kowalski to safety represents a choice every person faces throughout professional and personal lives. Choice between compliance and conscience, between safety and courage, between following rules and saving lives. Success of his technique demonstrated intelligent disobedience can produce better results than blind obedience, but also required support of leaders willing to accept responsibility for subordinates who violated orders in pursuit of mission success and human welfare. Would you have had courage to break the order and risk everything to guide fellow human being to safety, knowing failure would mean both personal consequences and another person's death? Comment below and share this story so others remember that sometimes greatest act of loyalty is courage to disobey when lives hang in balance.